I always say that I never sang any style of music that I hadn't heard in my household growing up. I can't approach it with any kind of authenticity.
What happens when two of the most uncompromising artists of the 1970s walk into the same recording studio and walk out never speaking again? In 1974, Linda Ronstadt and Frank Zappa attempted a collaboration that seemed destined for brilliance. Instead, it ended in silence, tension, and an unspoken rift that would never heal. Why did it fall apart so quickly? And what does it reveal about ego, respect, and creative control in the music industry?
A cultural hero or a role model or anything like that. I don't want it to be the absolute last word in what the trendy style is.
Linda Ronstadt's impact on rock and country in the early 1970s wasn't limited to her vocal performances. Behind the scenes, she played a pivotal role in shaping the early sound and trajectory of a band that would become one of the most iconic acts in American music history, the Eagles. But what began as a symbiotic collaboration eventually dissolved into a rift, marked by perceived disrespect and a quiet, yet decisive, act of severance. By 1971, Ronstadt was emerging as a significant figure in the California country rock scene. She needed a backing band for an upcoming tour, and among those who answered the call were two relatively unknown musicians, Don Henley and Glenn Frey. Henley took up the drums and harmonies while Frey played guitar. They were joined by Randy Meisner and Bernie Leadon to round out what became a tight-knit unit behind Ronstadt on stage. What the tour did for Henley and Frey was transformative. Ronstadt offered far more than a gig. She granted them visibility, credibility, and invaluable connections within the industry. In the landscape where female artists were carving out their place, she had already forged relationships with producers, promoters, and record executives. Relationships she introduced to her backing band. By the end of the tour, Frey and Henley had made their decision. They were setting out to form their own band. Ronstadt didn't block the move. Instead, she actively encouraged executives to give them a look. The result was instantaneous. By 1973, the Eagles had a hit single with Take It Easy, and soon followed with tracks like Desperado, One of These Nights, and the career-defining Hotel California. Their ascent coincided with Ronstadt's continued solo achievements. Yet behind that success lay a growing tension. Central to the friction was Henley's shifting attitude after the band's rapid rise to stardom. In the mid-1970s, he reportedly began referring to Ronstadt's music as safe and too polished during interviews, comments that likely stung given she had mentored them early on. Those remarks weren't merely aesthetic critiques, they carried undertones of dismissal. The tension escalated in private. According to accounts, Henley leveraged Ronstadt's name to access venues and events where he had no business being. He allegedly demanded guest passes to her headline tour, despite not being part of it. When Ronstadt discovered this, that he had used her association to gain uninvited access, she revoked all his backstage credentials. From that moment forward, Henley was no longer welcome at her shows. Ronstadt handled the situation quietly. She didn't go public or issue statements, but insiders say she made her position clear. For someone known for poise and diplomacy, cutting ties was a rare and deliberate move. But she felt the line had to be drawn. Henley had taken advantage of her goodwill. Whether explicit or implicit, it was something she would not tolerate in her professional domain. Much has been made of what Ronstadt contributed creatively during that tour. Observers noted that her vocal layering techniques and stage discipline directly influenced early Eagles' sound and performance. After all, recordings reveal how she blended harmonies and engaged audiences, aspects that later became hallmarks of Eagles' shows. Frey himself has credited watching her record harmonies as a foundational training experience. Yet when the Eagles achieved fame, those acknowledgements faded. Henley, in particular, spoke of the band's rise as though it were completely self-made. No public gratitude was extended toward Ronstadt. Given how influential she was in those formative months, the omission felt like a quiet slight, one that suggested a desire to claim autonomy at the cost of erasing her early role. After the credentials were revoked, Ronstadt and Henley rarely interacted again. She continued to evolve, exploring genres like mariachi, opera, and big band. Henley, meanwhile, stuck closely with the Eagles' classic rock identity, later pursuing a successful solo career. Each attended to their career trajectories, but the episode remained a silent undercurrent, a story known only within close circles. What sets this moment apart isn't just that betrayal occurred, but how Ronstadt responded. She didn't respond with public statements or litigation. She didn't join in the media mudslinging. She allowed her professionalism and career to communicate her message. Being taken for granted, even by those you helped, is a line she wouldn't cross. Don Henley went on to co-write Eagles classics and win multiple Grammys, and Ronstadt continued her own run of #1 hits and selling out arenas. Yet their early collaboration remains an important and often overlooked chapter in rock history, rooted in power, influence, and the quiet resolve to act when respect is violated. That's the beginning of Linda Ronstadt's story with the Eagles. It sets the tone for what was to come, a career defined not only by her talent, but by her refusal to enable those who didn't treat her as an equal. In the next segment, we'll explore another defining chapter, where professional decorum met raw onstage chaos, and where the real test of boundaries emerged. Linda Ronstadt's rise to stardom in the late 1960s was marked by talent, tenacity, and professionalism. She had already demonstrated early success with the Stone Ponies before branching out on her own. By 1968, she was cultivating a solo career rooted in authenticity and understated confidence. But it was during this time that she crossed paths with one of the era's most notorious frontmen, Jim Morrison of The Doors. Unlike the Eagles episode, this story involved public confrontations, on stage and off, and tested Ronstadt's poise in unexpected ways. At the height of The Doors' popularity, Morrison was a provocateur on and off stage. Known for his unpredictable behavior and penchant for physical and verbal shocks, he often blurred the lines between performance and personal boundaries. During one of Ronstadt's early opening performances, though the specific date remains unclear, Morrison stormed onto the stage unannounced. Accounts suggest that he reached for Ronstadt and attempted to kiss her in front of the audience. Stunned, Ronstadt froze in shock. The moment was sudden, uncomfortable, and very public. Being a rising female artist navigating a male-dominated scene, Ronstadt faced few such aggressive interruptions. She was calm, controlled, and emotionally resilient. But Morrison's surprise advance forced a reckoning. Such a public disruption was not merely embarrassing, it risked undermining her rapport with fans and threatening the integrity of her performative space. Ronstadt didn't sulk or lash out. Rather, she processed the incident privately. Her team, managers, and those around her made it clear that this was unacceptable. Afterwards, she avoided any appearance where Morrison would be nearby. It was an unspoken but firm boundary. Respect her space, or don't enter it. Yet the backstage tension did not remain private for long. Morrison later made a cutting remark about Ronstadt in a radio interview, dismissing her as sweet but spineless. He criticized the perceived lack of fire in her performance style, mocking her understated, controlled stage presence. For a publicist's soundbite, it carried weight. Morrison was influential, and his opinions reached wide audiences. It stung, especially because it was coming from someone already known for erratic, color-splashed antics. Ronstadt chose not to respond publicly. She didn't issue statements, call Morrison out directly, or engage in sensational headlines. Instead, she doubled down quietly, in her music, in her performances, and in her ability to maintain her composure. The silence spoke volumes. She refused to be defined by someone else's narrative. In time, her peers and industry insiders began to take note, not only of her vocal talent, but of her emotional intelligence. Her reputation went from simply being a strong singer to being someone with integrity and resolve. In any era dominated by rock drama, a poised, professional approach commanded respect, even if it didn't win shoutiness. At the same time, Morrison's own trajectory became increasingly troubled. Substance abuse and erratic behavior took a toll. His performances became unpredictable, and the chaos she witnessed that night remained part of his unfolding decline. Morrison died in 1971 at the age of 27, following a short but turbulent career. By contrast, Ronstadt went on to build a long and vibrant career. She continued refining her craft, exploring new genres, and collaborating with others on her terms. She didn't flee from visibility, but she also didn't let it compromise her professionalism. What's often overlooked is how this event reshaped her approach to her stage presence. Sources say that after Morrison's stunt, she scrutinized her performance persona with newfound clarity. She doubled down on thoughtfulness, deliberate pacing, and respectful interaction with her audiences and band. The aftermath became a turning point, one she used to define what she would accept or reject in her career. Other than retreat, adjusted, she refined her sense of control, consciously building an image of maturity that stood in contrast to rock and roll's more anarchic tendencies. It wasn't about distancing herself from the rock world. It was about asserting her own identity within it. In those scenes, one sees Ronstadt grappling with two competing models, one that celebrated reckless confrontation and one that prized responsibility. She chose the latter, not to temper her artistry, but to ground it. It gave her performances an emotional clarity that resonated more deeply than any stage stunt. Over the years, critics and historians have observed how she balanced bold musical choices with steady resolve. She never completely retreated from risk. She sang mariachi, big band, opera, and Broadway-influenced arrangements. But she did so on her terms. That happened in part because the Morrison episode reaffirmed for her what was worth protecting: her creative autonomy and her emotional boundaries. Thus, compare that to Morrison's legacy. To many, he is the archetype of rock star excess. Charismatic yet self-destructive, visionary yet prone to entitlement. His attempt to impose a momentary shock on Ronstadt communicates not just a moment of conflict, but a portrait of his ego-led approach to performance and interaction. The significance of the incident extends beyond its moment. It highlighted the tension between individualism and respect, between spontaneous provocation and professional consideration. Ronstadt's response reflected a worldview. Talent need not come at the expense of dignity. Years later, historians of Laurel Canyon and Southern California music scenes often note this story, not as salacious gossip, but as a moment where a prominent young artist asserted her right to space, to respect, and to define herself by her own terms. The incident became part of her wider narrative, a story of quiet strength in an industry that often favored loudness. It's hard to measure exactly how much the Morrison incident affected her choice of future collaborators or style of performance. But one thing is clear: she never allowed shock tactics to shape her own artistry. Instead, she developed a model of engagement rooted in mutual respect, creative clarity, and emotional intelligence. In retrospect, the episode with Morrison shines as a moment of assertion. It reminds us that behind every stage personality lies a human being with boundaries. Ronstadt did not raise the volume, raise her voice, or fan the flames. She simply held ground, and then, with characteristic poise, she moved on. In the next segment, we will explore a different kind of clash, an ideological collision at a benefit concert that revealed how appearances can conceal deeper tensions. But even there, we will see the same truth endure, that Ronstadt wielded her voice and her choices with clarity and control. In the mid-1170s, Linda Ronstadt had firmly established herself not just as a singer, but as a cultural force. She had achieved consecutive million-seller albums, solidified her image as the First Lady of Rock, and left her mark on the country rock landscape. By 1976, she was not just a fixture in American music, but a bridge between genres, respected for her voice and her taste. It was in this period of crossover fame and commercial alignment that she encountered Neil Young at a politically charged benefit concert, a meeting that would quietly test her artistic values and sense of sincerity. The event in question took place in 1976 during a concert supporting farm workers' rights, an issue close to both artists, though they approached it quite differently. Ronstadt had long been an advocate for social causes, and she was no stranger to performing at benefit concerts. That year, she joined a lineup featuring Neil Young, known for his folk rock activism, and a number of others who shared a passion for protest. The stage was set for a powerful musical moment, a convergence of talent united behind a cause. But what transpired behind the scenes was less harmonious. Neil Young, whose artistic identity was rooted in raw, unfiltered emotional expression, apparently found Ronstadt's polished, radio-ready delivery out of sync with the gritty, urgent tone he felt the concert demanded. According to people who were present, Young vocalized dissatisfaction during rehearsals and kept his distance during the performance, describing her contribution as too clean for the context. To him, protest music needed edge and roughness, qualities he believed Ronstadt's style lacked. On the surface, this might seem like a difference of taste, but beneath it lay strong ideological undercurrents. Ronstadt saw her clarity and professionalism as strengths, tools to engage wider audiences with important messages. Young, by contrast, believed that political music should hit that raw nerve, even if it sounded imperfect. He allegedly questioned her sincerity, suggesting that polished singers did not carry the same authenticity as their edgier counterparts. The tension was palpable. Ronstadt, who had chosen to contribute to the cause with her full commitment, found herself questioned in public spaces not just for her performance, but for her authenticity. She was not performing to promote herself. She was lending her voice to a movement she believed in. Yet Young's implied critique made it seem otherwise. Those remarks, though not sensationalism in the press at the time, spread through music industry circles. The effect was subtle yet cutting. A doubt cast on her motivations. Ronstadt did not respond with public retorts. She did not issue statements in Rolling Stone or appear on talk shows to deflect criticism. Instead, she took a private stance of professionalism and self-respect. Sources suggest she quietly removed Young from consideration in future projects. Perhaps more tellingly, she became more selective about the benefit events she participated in, choosing opportunities where both the goal and the setting aligned with her sense of integrity. Her rationale was simple. She would not dilute her sense of mission for the sake of visibility. Following the incident, Ronstadt pivoted toward more impactful forms of activism, supporting causes behind the scenes through funding and strategic choices, rather than compromising her ideals on stage. She applied the same discipline that had served her musically to her political commitments. That clarity came through in how she handled herself and her career. In time, the contrast became stark. Young continued to pursue political causes with unabashed roughness. His albums and concerts maintained their jagged edges. But for Ronstadt, the benefit concert marked a subtle turning point, one that matured her perspective on how music and activism could serve each other without sacrificing artistic values. What the public seldom hears is that this disagreement was never about politics. It was about mutual respect. Ronstadt respected Young's vision, understood its raw integrity, but expected him to do the same for hers. She believed activism could coexist with polished artistry. His refusal to acknowledge that stance was the real issue. The aftermath was largely quiet. Neither artist addressed the incident publicly, and their career paths diverged without fanfare. Ronstadt focused on her next album, Hasten Down the Wind, which embraced country and rock interpretations yet retained a polished emotional core. Young, meanwhile, pressed on with solo projects and eventually founded Farm Aid with fellow musicians in 1985. Continuing to champion causes in his own uncompromising style, In retrospect, critics and historians have come to view the episode as emblematic of changing attitudes toward musician activism. Ronstadt's choice to powerfully engage with activism while maintaining control over her artistic expression became increasingly replicated by other artists. She demonstrated that one need not choose between clarity of message and polished presentation. You could be radio-ready and politically minded too. Moreover, the incident reveals how music scenes began to fracture. One side embraced protest's polished voice, the other clung to its raw roots. Ronstadt's approach foreshadowed later generations of politically active artists who infused activism into mainstream formats, something that had once seemed dichotomous. In the context of her broader career, the Neil Young benefit concert offers several insights. It showed how Ronstadt was not passive. Even at the peak of her success, she knew when to step away from projects that didn't align with her values. It revealed her strategic evolution, from stage to studio to boardroom, as she became an artist who shaped not just music, but the mechanisms behind it. And perhaps most importantly, it affirmed her belief that respect for artistry was a core part of respect for causes. It would be easy to dismiss the incident as a minor disagreement among celebrities, but that underestimates its significance. For Ronstadt, it was a lesson reinforced by consequences. If her participation in an event carried personal cost to her integrity, she would walk away, quietly, professionally, and without fanfare. That same judgment would guide her through future collaborations, activism, and artistic decisions. Ultimately, the Neil Young moment remains a footnote in music history, but a revealing one. It captures not just a clash, but a choice. Ronstadt chose boundaries over compromise. She chose clarity of purpose alongside clarity of production, and she set a precedent for musicians everywhere who face moments when principle and performance collide. Looking ahead, we see that this episode is part of a broader trend, artists defining their own standards of engagement. Ronstadt didn't sacrifice artistic dignity for social engagement. Instead, she wove them together in a way that felt coherent, with intention, belief, and creative design. And that might be her most important legacy of all. In our next segment, we will explore her collaboration with Frank Zappa, a story that pits control against chemistry and where creative arrogance meets emotional consequence. Linda Ronstadt's reputation in the 1970s was built not only on her voice, but also on her professionalism, collaborative spirit, and careful selection of musical partnerships. That made it all the more striking when her session with Frank Zappa in 1974 was so discordant. Zappa, renowned for his exactitude and perfectionism, clashed with Ronstadt's approach to music making, and the incident had far-reaching effects on both artists. Exploring this chapter reveals much about creative control, artistic chemistry, and the price of pride. In 1974, Ronstadt was riding high. She had already delivered platinum seller albums and proven her versatility across pop, country, and rock. Zappa, by contrast, occupied a distinct musical niche, one defined by avant-garde explorations, studio experimentation, and an unsentimental drive for precision. Despite their different backgrounds, the idea of them collaborating made sense on paper. Ronstadt was keen to expand her musical boundaries, while Zappa sought fresh voices to animate his elaborate compositions. They entered the studio with hope, anticipation, and mutual curiosity. Zappa gathered his band and the recording team accustomed to respecting his authority. Ronstadt brought her readiness to sing, suggest ideas, and blend her voice into intricate arrangements. Yet what promised musical fireworks quickly dimmed. The meeting of two strong artistic personalities turned into a test of wills. From the outset, the atmosphere was strained. Zappa, who expected deference to his method, began directing Ronstadt with a formality that bordered on authoritarianism. He would stop the band mid-measure, demand replays, or critique the slightest deviation from the score. When Ronstadt offered her input, sometimes suggesting phrasing changes or proposing a melodic variation, Zappa dismissed her ideas with laughter, not correction, but mockery. It was not a private rebuke, it happened in full view of the group, a way for him to assert dominance without engaging in real exchange. Ronstadt did not lash out. Instead, she managed the tension by staying polite, seeking clarity, and attempting to adapt. She was used to collaborative studios, where give and take was part of the process. But here, respect was in short supply. She sensed that every suggestion she made would generate sniggers rather than serious consideration. The session ended abruptly. Without public controversy or dramatic exits, she simply left before they wrapped recording. There was no confrontation, no final note of apology, just silence. Reports say the session tapes were shelved and ultimately forgotten. Nothing of that time made it into any release. Zappa carried on as if nothing had happened, and Ronstadt retreated into her own projects without mentioning the incident to the press. It wasn't until later, in less public conversations, that Zappa provided more context. He reportedly referred to the experiment as proof that a pop artist couldn't handle serious music. He drew a sharp distinction between his world, geared toward complexity, unconventional rhythms, and structural risk, and Ronstadt's approach, which he perceived as polished and mainstream. To Zappa, genuine musical exploration demanded a willingness to submit to arcane demands and broad conceptual frameworks. Any resistance, however mild, suggested the artist was not ready for the challenge. From Ronstadt's perspective, the session was less about toughness and more about chemistry. Creativity is a partnership, not a dictatorship. She realized that while Zappa's projects were fascinating, they weren't the kind she was meant to fuel. For an artist who valued vocal clarity and emotional resonance, the refusal to treat her voice as a peerable instrument represented a breakdown rather than a breakthrough. In the aftermath, Ronsby made adjustments to the way she worked. She moved toward studio environments she could co-lead, where her voice, vision, and intuition would be integral to the process. Over the following years, she explored big band arrangements, the romantic sweep of mariachi music, and deeply personal country rock. Multiple genres and collaborations later, one thing was clear: she operated on her own terms. She was the architect of her sound. Zappa, conversely, kept refining his own methodology. He collaborated with vocalists and musicians who could adapt to his structured, politically incisive, and rhythmically precise world. The incident with Ronstadt didn't rock his career. It was just another signpost along a path largely defined by singular excellence and occasional interpersonal distance. And while many artists sought him out, many more bolt at the same reasons. The story of their failed collaboration lives on as a sort of parable. It illustrates both the value of creative control and the risk of creative authoritarianism. Ronstadt did not need to participate in Zappa's world to anchor hers. Zappa did not need to compromise his standards. Both moved forward, and the session, shelved and forgotten, became a quiet testament to the importance of mutual respect in artistic endeavor. We can look back and see how this affected the wider arc of Ronstadt's career. Immediately afterwards, she emphasized partnerships where input was shared. Her albums with Nelson Riddle paired orchestral arrangements with her voice in a tone of equality and shared space. Her foray into traditional Mexican music felt like a match between her voice and the tradition, not an exercise designed by someone else. Over time, she became known for her agency, rare for a female voice of the era. While others accepted their roles in male-driven environments, Ronstadt insisted on collaboration and communication. She brought vision, initiative, and emotional intelligence into every studio she entered. Feliz. This attitude carried lessons far beyond her own recordings. In an industry often shaped by male producers or demanding auteurs, she demonstrated that respect could still be non-negotiable. Her legacy holds a quiet promise. That strong musical vision does not require one to silence others. In fact, music often resonates most powerfully when collaboration is allowed to flow freely. Zappa's ultimate impact may lie elsewhere, in pushing boundaries, provoking unexpected sounds, and carving out an uncompromising space in music. But the Ronstadt session is a reminder that when creative methods turn into creative walls, the walls push people away. With hindsight, it's impossible to call that session a failure. It was a collision point that reinforced identities. For Ronstadt, it emphasized autonomy and boundaries. For Zappa, it reaffirmed his belief in uncompromising standards. The tale, buried in the vaults, offers a lesson invisible to public eyes. Flesh out the value of chemistry along with ability, and make sure respect is an ingredient, never optional. In the decades since, Ronstadt's path continued to evolve. She worked with the finest arrangers, composers, and musicians, always on terms she shaped. Zappa's influence continued to echo in experimental circles, admired for what it achieved. The two never crossed paths again, but their brief studio encounter speaks volumes. It was a lesson in creative humility and self-respect, quietly shaping two divergent directions in the world of music.